Cool.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So, as Mike Butcher said, we are very privileged this morning to be here with Matt Mullenweg, who is the founder of Automatic, which is the company behind Wordpress. And Wordpress today, I think, powers 17% of the top 1 million websites. So Matt has certainly made a huge mark on the web. And as we move into a world where the web is becoming less and less open, where young internet companies are under pressure to find ways to own their customers' contacts and address book, and one in which companies like Google kind of control the browser and the search engine on the phones. Apple controls which apps go in its app store. There's a question of, can you build a business that is true to the original mandate of it? Yes, exactly. And so you built something that was open source, and then you've built other businesses around that are sustainable and profitable. So the question is, can you build a business that does not go for this kind of supplier lock-in and do well and do good?
And speaking of proprietary namespaces, what's your Twitter handle, just so everyone can tweet?
Oh, okay. So my Twitter handle is, I have two, Jen Schenker and Informulo Media.
And I'm PhotoMatt, P-H-O-T-O. I think you can. I mean, that's part of why I wanted to start Automatic, was to show that, because traditionally open source companies have been sort of more enterprisey things. Yeah. And you remember this, there's the Red Hats of the world and such. And I've always been excited about what is now called the consumer web, like empowering the billions of people that are going to come online over the next 20 years, 10 years, to have a voice, to be able to do something that they couldn't normally. I think open source is incredibly powerful for that. And if you look at the startup competition, everyone in the competitions today, none of their descriptions say open source in them. And I think the impetus is on, if you believe in this, if you believe the web should be open, if you believe, it's actually, I get a lot of great feedback when I'm in Europe on this, more so than in America. Our impetus is to create these businesses and show that you can create, billion-dollar businesses on these basics of open source.
So
fundamental tenets, I guess, is a way.
What kind of advice would you give to the entrepreneurs in the room? Because as they, come up with ideas for great businesses, they're under pressure if they want to raise money from investors to show them, how quickly they're going to become profitable and how they're going to become profitable. So how do you do that with an open source business? How did you do it?
Sure, and also I do some investing myself through RG Capital. Traction beats everything, right? It was, in 2005, I was 20 and we raised $1 million. No one should have given me $1 million check. That was a terrible idea.
Well, how did you do it? How did you convince them?
WordPress had some pretty significant traction already at the time. It started about 2 years prior, and I had a job at CNET, so they knew I could hold down a job for a year. I guess some combination of those things presented itself as this was a great opportunity. But yeah, traction beats everything. We had already started to get some great switchers at the time, early users of WordPress, and probably around 100, 200,000 users. And now you can get that even quicker.
Right, okay. So at what point did you say, all right, we need to add on some businesses that are going to bring in some additional revenue sources? When did you decide that? How did you decide it? And how did you structure that?
Well, that is actually no different when you're building an open source business from when you're building a regular business. Like, it's easy to say that, oh, it's tough for open source businesses to make money. But in fact, it's tough for all businesses to make money. We were not a nonprofit, but a no-profit for several years. So how I like to think of that is, what can you do that provides that sort of intrinsic value to start that most sacred ceremony in capitalism when someone opens their wallet and gives you their hard-earned money, something that they worked, went to a job for, really worked for. That exchange of value is what sets the market, and I think you have to earn it. So when they looked at what was hard around WordPress, there were a few things. There was things like anti-spam, backup and security, and ultimately the hosting it in general, which is what WordPress.com does, that people found valuable. I mean, if they're going to give $10 a month to GoDaddy, perhaps we could provide something that's even a better service, better value, and maybe even cheaper, which we did.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how many rounds did you raise along the way? And did you have to, what were the differences in, how hard it was to raise the money and how you had to present to the investors, and what did you learn from that?
We raised 2 rounds, one in 2006, one in 2008. The first round was $1 million. The second round was $30 million. The $30 million was way easier. Wow. I don't know why. I think investors, they're just writing a check anyway. They add an extra zero, it's okay. I think part of it was that, so the first round, the great thing is, because we were open source, because I was so young, we had the great natural filter, where some investors did dismiss it sort of right away, but actually not that many. And the ones that did, I was glad that this wasn't someone that I was going to be working with over the next 5 or 10 years, because they probably might have dismissed other ideas along the way. So
once you started to get a lot of traction, you were in more of a power position to kind of choose which investors you wanted, I suppose.
Of course.
And so what did you look for in the investor?
First and foremost, long-term outlook. And there's also mechanics around funds and VCs that you should know about this as well, but just the idea that I wanted to build a business for decades, and so I needed an investor that could be on board with that. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a wonderfully transparent thing when you have that two-way conversation and are open about it, because some people will say, no. But that's good. You want to know that in front, not like 5 or 8 years in, right, when their fund size is closing and they're going to have to liquidate part of their stock or something like that. So talk about those things very, very much up front. And so that comfort with open source, like a real commitment to it, because I knew that, at least as long as I was at the company, I only wanted to work at a place whose primary output was open source software. And so the investors had to be comfortable with that, comfortable with the fact that someone could copy and paste our whole code base and start a competitor to WordPress.com the next day, which actually happened.
And how did you deal with that?
There's an interesting story. I think it was called iBlogs or something. So it was a competitor to WordPress.com running the software that we had open sourced that was doing better than us, which was a little bit of a bummer. But so your first reaction, and this happens whenever you put something out as open source, there's always someone who sort of takes it and does it. And I was like, well, this is terrible. Like, someone took all of our hard work and they're benefiting from it. And I was like, wait a second. Like, it's not like they have some special advantage in the market. Like, this is an open marketplace. This is the web. If people are choosing them, it's because they're doing something better. So I was like, well, maybe they're back there right now. No. And when we dug into it, they were marketing so much better than us. Just their website was better, the messaging was better. I think the first version of WordPress.com, like the features on the homepage, like number 3 was why the heck not? Start a blog. So I was like, well, let's tell people a little bit more about the advantages of both using WordPress.com and why to have a blog. And yeah, they were probably about double our size, but we caught up. And my ultimate conclusion was, if someone can take the software rewrote and do a better job with it, they deserve it.
Okay.
Because people rip off your idea regardless of whether it's open source or not.
Yes, that's true. But you also learned about some valuable lessons there too in scaling the business. That in the beginning you just sort of throw out what you have and see what happens and how people take it up. But as the business matures, you have to start thinking about things like marketing and and other things as well. So as your business is scaled, like how many people work in the company now?
So Automatic just passed 150.
And you just made an acquisition recently.
We did. We acquired a company, SimpleNote, and that it makes a service called Simperium. You guys should all check out SimpleNote.
So what have you found to be the special challenges in scaling? And also, how do you absorb another company and that maybe has a slightly different culture, a different way of working, et cetera?
That's a tough one. Most of the acquisitions we do are relatively small numerically. So Simperium was 3 guys.
Okay.
So, and they were very much philosophically aligned. In fact, the first thing we did when we bought them was to open source all of their core software, because they had been too nervous to, as a small, struggling startup, to open source kind of their core IP. So we were like, well, let's do that. This customer's not adopting you because you have sort of this black box library. So we open sourced it all. So that was pretty cool. And many of the other people who could have acquired them weren't going to do that. So it made us more attractive. In terms of scaling, the hardest thing, hiring, firing, and management. I mean, between those 3, you kind of have every point in the life cycle of a company, and they change at every single level. I mean, how we did that at 15 was different from 30, was different from 50, 100, 150, and we're planning for it to be 200, 500. And just thinking about what are the systems you're setting in place today, and what does that look like? This sort of cool policy that you're setting up. Like when you have 1,000 people, how does that work?
Right. And what have you learned along the way in hiring? Like, do you have any sort of key, points to people in the audience who have young companies about, what to avoid, or, if you made some mistakes, and most companies do in hiring, at least 1 or 2, right? If you were doing it over again, what would you do differently, and what could you advise the people in the audience?
I'll think about what I would do differently. I'd say the things I would do again.
Okay.
Because it's kind of current with the whole Yahoo bringing all their distributed people in, saying they can. We tried to build the company like an open source project, and that meant not discriminating on the basis of geographic location. We have people all over the world. I think of the 150 people, 130 are outside of San Francisco. So literally scattered all over the world. And that's amazing, because you can hire the best people, the best and brightest, regardless of whether they are in or will move to wherever your company happens to be, where 99.9% of the world probably doesn't live. So that was huge. And the second thing we figured out was just that regardless of credentials, I mean, I didn't graduate from college, so it would be very hypocritical of me to look at GPAs and stuff like that. Okay. So regardless of any of that traditional resume stuff, there's no substitute for just being in the trenches with someone. I mean, think of the people who you would work with again. It's probably someone who you worked with before, and you just had a great experience with it. And so we tried to replicate, and do replicate that in our hiring process. So what we do is everyone who joins, we actually do a trial project with them. It's paid, so we sort of hire them on a short-term contract and just do something. It almost doesn't matter what, because really what you're looking for is how you communicate, how you work together, how everything else. We find that even people who pass the code test and do all this sort of other jazz, the interviews go great, that working together is actually a good mutual thing. You want them to make sure they like working with you as well. Yep. So it's kind of a mutual trial, and that has raised the hit rate of our hiring 95% from what it was before we did that. So I would highly recommend adopting something like that if you can.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that through Audrey, you do a little bit of angel investing as kind of a way of giving back, right? So what do you look for when you make those investments? Are you looking for somebody that reminds you of you? Do you make them, do PowerPoint slides and business plans, or do you go with the gut? Is it the passion, the excitement? What turns you on when you meet a young entrepreneur?
Well, I do require a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation. I guess I should diversify by looking for people not like me. But as you might have guessed through this interview, I really believe in open source. I think this is the most powerful idea of our generation, certainly. And beyond that, I kind of look for things that just I would want to work on for fun. So I used to play alto saxophone, actually. It was kind of cool that we had a little jazz intro coming in. And so I like music stuff, even though I know music businesses are kind of terrible. I look for markets, anything open source. Probably the most typical example of an Audrey investment would be MakerBot, which is one we did a few years ago. It's open source. It creates cool things in the world. They have this great marketplace of sort of the Thingiverse where you can open source objects and share them. And they're doing good in the world while also being an extraordinarily successful business. And I think we just need so many more examples of those. So, the next London Web Summit, when there's 20 startups in the competition, every single one will say open source in the description.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's have a nice round of applause for Matt.
Thank you. Those are awesome questions. I really appreciate it.